Hello and welcome to a special edition of SCoReTalk, a series where we host discussions on contemporary issues with leaders of communications. My name is Hemant Gole and I'm a part of the School of Communications and Reputation. As a part of the Global Alliance's Diversity and Inclusion Month, this edition is being hosted by SCoRE to recognize the importance and strength of D&I and to gather insights on how to move towards it more effectively. Please check out globalalincepr.org to check out more resources on this subject that might help you, your clients, or your stakeholders. I also want to thank Reputation Today for helping us make this series possible. The hashtag for this event is hashtag SCoReTalk. So if you find anything insightful, please tweet about it with hashtag SCoReTalk. If you're watching this on Zoom, and if you have any questions, feel free to put these questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. This is also being live streamed on our YouTube channel. Allow me to introduce our panel for today, and we are very grateful to be joined by leaders of communications teams and firms. We have Akshara Lanwani from Communicate India, Janet Arole, who heads corporate communications at Aditya Birla Fashion and Retail, Pankaj Suri, who heads human resources at Edelman India, and Smita Basu Roy, who heads corporate communications at Walters Limited. Thank you so much for joining us for this interesting subject of diversity and inclusion in communications firms and teams, something that has become increasingly pertinent over the last few years and therefore become really important for reputation management professionals to understand the impact of it and how to integrate it seamlessly into an organization. So let's start with the basics. What is your understanding of diversity and inclusion? How does it manifest in short and long terms, and how do you ensure that D&I is adhered to? And can we start with Akshara? Akshara, your understanding, and specifically, how does it manifest in your firm and perhaps for your clients?
Well, firstly, thanks for having me. I think this is very pertinent now. Even though we've moved, the benchmark slightly higher, but just from the perspective of, inclusivity, it's merely equality. It's just transcending mere equality, which is a breakaway from whether it's societal, economic divisions, whether it's gender, whether it's a whole lot of things, right? That could create disparities and reduction of equal opportunities, and gender just seems to be one of them, whether it's race, whether it's color, whether it's language. So inherently, that in a nutshell is what I understand by the terminology.
Right. Moving on to Janet as the head of communications of a large and trusted brand. What do you think? What's the meaning of D&I and how does it manifest around you?
So thanks, Hemant, for inviting me for the session. So as you all know, Aditya Birla Fashion and Retail hosts some of the best brands in the country, such as Louis Philippe, Van Heusen, Allen Solly, Peter England. And we have got a host of brands across the country, across the length and breadth of the country. And along with our stores, we have a huge workforce that goes along, that support our stores. Along with our stores, we have 8 manufacturing units. So you can imagine the kind of workforce that we employ. And we have a large workforce, which is front end and back end. And unless you practice diversity and inclusion in our work ethos, you will never be able to get in the buy-in of people who live across the length and breadth of the country. So you need to have work policies that are friendly, not only for metros, but smaller towns and cities. So yes, as an organization, I feel, we have some of the best policies which are gender neutral.
I hope we will get a chance to hear some of those policy interventions as well through this discussion. Pankaj, you had HR for one of the largest PR firms in India. How does D&I manifest for you and around you?
Well, thanks, Hemant, for having me on this panel today. So to me, diversity is more about the representation, while inclusion is about involvement. And while the former being is an action, the latter is more about the feeling of belongingness. And, whenever I got a chance to speak on this topic, I always use this metaphor of fork and spoon, and pardon me if you guys have already heard about that, but to me, if you compare fork and spoon, I mean, fork, is pointed. You prefer that having during mains than desserts, and spoon is not pointed, and you generally prefer having spoon for desserts than mains. Um, and that is one way of looking at those two pieces, where you're looking at the differences. But the other way could be to compare how they are similar, you know, and and both spoon and fork, if you see, they are made of the same material, and they actually serving the same purpose of feeding us. And for me, that is the very important aspect of what we are talking today on diversity and inclusion. It isn't about the fact that we are different. I think the important part of the conversation is that we are more the same than we are different. And when we talk about diversity, diversity is important because in forks and spoons, I mean, we can achieve a lot more than we could, as a fork or a spoon by itself. And I think that's what we are as humans, because we share the same purpose. We all want to find meaning in our lives. And it's through that purpose and it's through that shared purpose, basically, that as humans, we go on to doing some amazing things. I mean, and 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 our differences is what allows us to achieve more together. I mean, that's my perspective on this topic, Hemant.
Thanks so much for that, Pankaj. I, for one, at least hadn't heard of that metaphor, so thank you. Smita, coming to you, Voltas has diverse stakeholders across your value chain. Could you talk about DNI from that perspective and how it shapes up around you?
So yeah, like you rightly said, Hemant, Voltas is an extremely diversified conglomerate, and just not in one geography, but across the globe, right? So it's very important to have DNI as a very important pillar of the organization. But I will first start with, let's just first see what does diversity and inclusion really mean for an organization. And I'm so glad that you all did not make a diversity and inclusion for workplace, but you made a diversity and inclusion in business, because as much as important, as much importance it has in an organization, it is equally important in the outside world. And that's where which is very important for me as a communicator for a business which is extremely diversified. Like Janet mentioned, be it from front end to back end, you need to be an equal employer for everyone and to make everyone feel very inclusive. And the same applies for your stakeholders in the outside world. If you, if I have to take Voltas as an example, and we are in the consumer space, around 70 to 80% of your total purchasing decisions are driven by women. And again, diversity is way more than just gender diversity. But if I have to pick up gender diversity as a point, 70 to 80% is decided by women. But if you don't have you don't have reflect that in your in amongst your employee split of employees, then that is, I mean, who is the person who is really, you have to represent the same consumer that you are catering to. That's one. Second, of course, in terms of talent, in terms of building an organization which is creative, which is future ready, ready for tomorrow, you need a more diverse, it creates more creativity, it builds more innovation, you're looking at more sections of the society. So yes, extremely important. I'm more excited about this being a conversation of DNI in business rather than just DNI at workplace.
Right. So you said something interesting. So it's not just about gender. Gender is one of the many factors that could define diversity, right? So could I just ask the panel for a couple of factors that they consider that constitute diversity, starting with Smita perhaps, and then I can go backwards. Besides gender, what are the factors?
Yes, so I think what's key for every organization to understand, and our role as as communicators to understand, is which way is DNI moving towards, and what is it, and how is it mapped to your business currently and your business needs. So currently, I at least for our business, and I think that this would apply for most organization, is gender for sure, because you've got a very, very mixed group of consumers out there. To understand them, starting from product development to the way you actually market the products to them, you need to reflect the same within the organization. Second is age. You have 47% of, I believe, millennials in your workforce. So it's important to have that, that mix of age group. And in a global organization like mine, I think race is important.
Great, thanks for that. Akshara, may I ask, besides these three factors, gender, age, and race, what do you consider important?
I mean, Smita really took it out. I mean, the age aspect, I think, is, we've always, even in businesses, sometimes it's like, oh, gray matter and gray hair go together, which is not the case, when many a times, just because there's gray hair doesn't mean that it's followed by gray matter. And it needs a balance, because diversity can come from, like you said, different cultures, even different religions. You'll be so surprised that there is so much learning that when we work with a particular client, that a particular community bent of mind gives us that edge, and even that, over and above just gender and age, there's so much more. We've had interns from across the world work with us, like from Australia and Spain. And it was an eye-opener, it was really incredible of what we learned from them. Then
All right.
only teaching them, and it really helped us get the right output and the right goal. And, I think that's where I come from.
That's interesting. Janet, what do you think? Besides gender, age, race, of course, geography and different cultures, what other factors seem to be important?
Okay. So to drive home this point, I'd like to go back again to give you examples of my company, because I think that would help visualize what I'm trying to say. So in our organization, if you see, we have stores and we have front end staff. So you can imagine this set of workers, they are maybe 10, 12 graduates. Okay. Then you have one set of audience who work in factories, okay, who come from completely different strata of society. Okay, so we employ those kind of people. And then you have the edge home. So we are having people across different strata of society, right, from metros to mini metros to rural areas. So we have to employ people across all genres. And that is where we have to consider this whole diversity issue when we are designing policies for these different sections of our audience within the organization. So yes, it's a very diverse group that we have, and I hope I've been able to address your question.
Great, thank you so much for that, Janet. Pankaj, what do you think? What other factors seem to be more important now and maybe in the near future as well?
Yeah, look, diversity is everywhere. I mean, when we are looking at organizations, I mean, co-panelists have already shared some of the parameters, but I mean, it could be anywhere. It could be about language. It could be about education background. It could be about the economic background. It could be about even cities, from where people are coming from. I mean, it could be about nationality. And these are pieces, that we need to keep in mind, and we'll talk more about as we get into that. But I have seen cases where people may form biases just looking at the name of the person, So those are the pieces which I think we need to be cognizant of when we are working in a corporate setup and we want to have a culture of, D&I. I think these are pieces which, and there is one very important aspect which I want to call out, that what we call as the affinity bias, and we'll talk about that, but that's another one, where unconsciously you try to relate someone, with someone, and as a result, there are chances where the preferences can be given to that particular individual. So we have to be mindful of all these pieces.
Right. Thanks for that, Pankaj, and thanks everyone. That lays the groundwork for what diversity and inclusion could mean, and I see that there's a lot of conversation about representation, about involvement, about being action-oriented in your understanding of diversity and inclusion. Integrating all of this into your organizations could take a lot of resources. So my question is there a business case for actively working towards D&I in organizations? And I want to quote a report by McKinsey that came out a couple of years ago that illustrated that diverse companies are 35% more likely to generate higher revenues. Another BCG report showed positive correlation between diversity and innovation, and there are several such studies that build a case for it. So if you're trying to build an internal case for higher diversity and inclusion, what are these business cases and what are the pitfalls if the organization does not focus on D&I? So can we start with Akshara?
I think the first thing is personal biases. And I think Pankaj said it really well, right? Sometimes you have associations from past memories, experiences, upbringing that you may have a particular bias in mind. And we've seen this even in examination halls. Like when we were, in school, they used to say, don't do anything specific on the paper that gives away your religion. And why not the same for your resume, right? It should be treated by HR or any decision maker without any bias. It's only regarding the job description, regarding the KPIs, KRAs, etc. And is this person most sorted for the role, sorted for the role and can deliver to the best of their ability? Leave everything aside. I think first is the most important part is getting rid of our personal biases and accepting it and being aware about it. Sometimes we're not even aware about the fact that we're biased.
Right.
I'd say that's the starting point, awareness.
Right. Janet, what do you think? How would you build a business case? Is there a linkage with greater profits, with a higher employee retention, perhaps? So is there a case for that?
Yeah. So I feel that one should go by the law of the land. And where you operate and what kind of scenario or what kind of business you are into, you'll have to take those scenarios and then establish those practices. So for example, we have 7 of our factories in Bangalore. 90% we employ there are women in the factory. Now, why do we do this? Because we see the women workforce there are a lot more committed, a lot more hardworking, and that skill requires a certain expertise which women are able to demonstrate it even more than men. So I think we'll have to go as per the given scenarios and develop our expertise on a case-to-case basis.
Right.
This is what I would think.
Right. Pankaj, what is your opinion?
No, for a firm like us, Heyman, where you have so many diverse groups working under the same roof, not only diversity from a skill standpoint, but also from a age background. You have the generation X, Y, Z all sitting under the same roof. I think you said it in the beginning. One, of course, you want to have that innovation, you want to have that creativity, you really want to bring people together to have those different points of views, and I think that can only happen if you have an inclusive environment where everyone feels welcome. So definitely that is one aspect why you want to have D&I in the organization. Two, I also believe it's the right thing to do. I mean, just imagine you getting into an organization where you start getting those repulsive vibes, where you don't feel welcome. I think it's not fair to that person. And as an organization, if we are looking at building our equity, I think that's where it all starts with. The bare minimum standard that one can have of getting into an organization is to feel respected, to feel part of that family. And finally, of course, it's about the bottom line benefit. And you rightly said, I was just looking at one of those reports from the Value of Diversity 2019. Exactly what you said. There are organizations which have outperformed just because they had better D&I, sort of processes which actually got into that sort of a culture mode, where 45% such organizations outperform, their competition. So definitely there's a business case, when it comes to the bottom line. But otherwise, I think it's just the right thing to do.
Right. Okay, thanks for that. Smita, in your ecosystem, internally and externally, what are these tangible benefits that you see of D&I? Something that you can perhaps present a case for to your internal stakeholders?
So, I'm just going to start with what you mentioned, Hemant, and you started the question with is, and because I'm going through the entire exercise, this is a season for annual reports, right? So I'm going through that entire exercise of annual report. And it is so important to, like you said clearly, that there is a McKinsey, and I mean, I was going to quote the same report where they've said that, companies which show very strong diversity and inclusion in their workforce, they tend to be 35% likely 35% more likely to record or report higher revenues. And so it's very important for my investors. So that's a business case for me. I mean, if I have to, that's one business case. Second, again, I'm going to try and make it as external as possible, because I know this is a huge seen as an HR item, but it's not. It's a business need today. So it's not just an HR item. Externally, also in terms of, there was a research done by, if I may quote right, the Strategy Global Consumer Pulse Research, and they had over 3 lakh consumers, and a fair share was from India. And over 81% of consumers did say that they prefer brands who take a stand on race, culture, gender, and political issues. So not being stereotypical, and being inclusive, and accepting and allowing differences is definitely one that benefits a brand, both in terms of corporate reputation, revenues, we spoke about it, profits, and also, like Pankaj said, bottom line. I think bottom line directly impacted by, if you can pull the right talent because of being a DNI strong organization, that itself will impact your bottom line positively.
That's very, very interesting that it's not just an HR item, it's also a business need. And I suppose businesses are recognizing that increasingly now, and are appreciative of the fact that more interventions would have to be probably made from the leadership side in order to ensure that
Correct.
there is fairness and there is representation and there is involvement. So once there is an intention to build stronger, more dedicated focus to D&I, we want to understand what are the challenges that an organization can face while taking those steps. And I want to start once again with Akshara. In your opinion, when you try to do it internally as a PR firm, or when you try to counsel the same to a client, what kind of challenges do you face?
It's really interesting, but and a very, true, real fact is sometimes there's resistance to change, right? We're a fairly young organization, but when I just talk to other business leaders, they're like more that, people are like, oh, it's always done this way. Doesn't mean that because it was done this way, that's the right way of doing it, right? So I think resistance for slightly older, more traditional companies. More importantly, like I think Smita has already said, it's not an HR function. It needs to have serious investment by all stakeholders, all leaders. And I think that's a part of it. You can't just leave it in a silo. It's not going to fix itself, right? It needs to come from the leaders of the organization in all aspects. And I think that is, I think those are the two, learnings. I think sometimes I've seen clients where they've said, oh, the person's really talented, but doesn't have enough experience, in the sector. And I would say that, these are some reservations that come in, as age is a barrier, or it comes in saying, oh, but she's not from our city, even something like that, saying she's not from our city, or, so I've seen a lot of these smaller examples, on a day-to-day basis that we see.
Right, biases and barriers that create resistance to change. Janet, as a part of a very progressive and large Indian conglomerate, do you see any challenges?
So I would like to add that, one size does not fit all. You'll have to customize your offering to your audiences, whether it's your internal, whether it's your external, even if it's your internal audiences. And as a brand storyteller, as a communicator, you'll have to, understand the needs of your audience, and then, tailor make that narrative to what is it that they're looking for. And I think once you've understood that, you would be able to address those gaps. So I think challenges would be there in every situation, but how do you address it, and how do you, create your narrative based on those challenges? I think that is something which, you know, we get to learn on an ongoing basis.
Right. Thanks for that, Janet. Coming to you, Pankaj, what are the challenges that you have seen in your ecosystem? Are there any specific challenges that emerge as a result of being a part of a independent global firm acting in India, or does that serve as an advantage to you?
Yeah, I mean, I'll not hold my statement only to Edelman, but if I look at my overall experience, of working in different organizations, I see, you know, these two factors the biggest deterrent, when it comes to having a DNI sort of a culture in an organization. One, of course, is the the top man's involvement. When I say the top man's involvement, I'm not talking about the leadership here. I'm talking the topmost person of the organization, the MD. He needs to be, he needs to believe in something like this, because if he's not into what we are talking about, whatever you may do, whatever interventions you may do, things won't change. One. Second, is the unconscious bias, which I mentioned earlier also. And while there could be many biases around age, ethnicity, sexual orientation, etc., but the most common one, which I said earlier, is the affinity bias, right? And that's the unconscious tendency, to get along with others who are like us. This can have an impact across different processes. It can have an impact on how you recruit people. When managers are more likely to hire people who look similar, or and surprisingly with similar sounding names. We have seen that sort of situation. It can have an impact on how you allocate work to people. You will see that, and there are many examples in the organizations where same set of people keep getting the meters of the roles, while there could be many others who are deserving, but just because someone has that sort of an affinity, he's always on the limelight. And then, of course, it also comes to how you measure performance. You will see there are people who have that advantage, of even doing some of those things which probably would have raised eyebrows for a lot of people, but just because they have good connections or managers have good sort of an understanding, they get scot-free. And then there are others who, get grilled like anyone. So I think that aspect is something which I would like to stress upon. We have to get rid of these biases, and many a times, I think Akshara mentioned that. We are not even aware that we are being biased. So one has to have sort of mechanisms by which people can be told right there and there itself that, look, this is not right and this needs to be corrected. So that what I would say, the two big challenges for any organization getting into that sphere. They want to be looked at as a very, very inclusive organization.
Thanks so much for that, Pankaj. Smita, what's your opinion? Have you had to make a business case in your role at Voltas? And therefore, what are some of the challenges that you have faced in your current role and your previous roles?
So let me take it into parts. One is, of course, my current situation, my current role in Voltas, and also I would like to cite some examples from where I, from the organization that I come from. So Voltas is it's the number one AC company. We've got the highest market share. Just ventured into consumer appliances, home appliances a couple of years back, gunning to be a leader in that space. So the organization is going through a huge change with extremely aggressive goals. So there's a lot of influx.
We may have lost
new talent. What happens is, hello, can you hear me?
Go ahead, Smita. Sorry, I think there was a lag.
Okay. So a company, which is going through this phase where you've got extremely aggressive, plans and goals, and you're young in your approach, and you're getting in, there's an influx of new talent. At the same time, you're a 6-decade-old company, so there is that established set of workforce as well. The challenge might, in situations like this, the challenge normally arises when, you are trying to communicate with different sets of audience. You have a diverse workforce, but the inclusion does not lie. I mean, the inclusion does not exist. Now, before you have diversity, I think it's very weirdly so that we say diversity and inclusion, but I think you should first have inclusion, a mindset of inclusion in your organization, and then have diversity. So so it's important to have that mindset and have that shift in culture already before you go around and have a diverse workforce. Um, that is one. There are, while that has been taken care of, but that's a journey that I'm going through right now at Voltas. I also come from an organization which is extremely established already, where diversity and inclusion is concerned. But I've gone through that entire process in that organization as well. And it is extremely important, and my learnings are that it's extremely important for there to be a top-down cascade. You cannot go ahead with this journey unless you, and that leader doesn't have to be a task. It has to be something that leader is passionate about. If you're not passionate about this, then it's not going to come to fruition. So yes, challenge, if your leader is looking at it as a line item, then it's not going to work. You've got to be very passionate. Again, it really so while I was reading, an article, and I came across that even till date, and this is a report that was released in the month of March by Accenture, only 37% of leaders in India look at diversity and inclusion as an organizational priority. It's not going to, it's going to remain a buzzword if we don't have more uptake for this subject.
Right. Thanks for that. And I hope that there are leaders of organizations listening to this conversation, or this message gets conveyed to them, because we have heard it more than once that it has to be a top-down approach. Otherwise, it probably end up being a line item. I want to remind the attendees that you can ask a question in our quick Q&A box. We already have some questions coming in, one of which I'm going to pick up because it's related to challenges that one can face while integrating diversity and inclusion. And it's asked by Julia, who asks, have any of you ever had to handle a situation where one colleague was not accepting of another's diversity, and how are such situations handled? So it's about internal resistance. So let's say the organization is trying to bring in diversity, but there is resistance from the employees themselves. So Akshara, have you faced that situation before?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think anyone who's been in their professional career for a while will have several examples, that require senior leadership intervention. And like I said, I think everyone on this panel kind of resonates the same voice, which is, it's imperative for senior leaders to really step in and take this seriously. And we've had people, who have had, issues with another colleague, maybe not from the same background, maybe from a different state, minor things. It could also be, forget men and women, we also, are very gender inclusive in general, right? So there are reservations of how people are particularly raised, and like I said, the personal biases. So we've had to take very strict actions and step in and get HR involved, get us involved, and say, this is, where has this come from? And have these open communication, open conversations, educate the person. I think, it requires time and investment for a HR person, a core leader, team leaders to sit down and explain the person and educate the person where it's coming from and how it needs to actually be dealt with.
Right. Thanks for that, Akshaya. Janet, have you faced a situation like that?
Okay, so let me give you my own example. Okay, so when I entered Aditya Birla Group more than 20 years ago, okay, the culture was very, very different. Okay, so what it is now and what it was then, I've seen that big shift. So when we entered the group, it was predominantly a very male-oriented, group, and Dr. Ram used to head corporate communications, and she was the only women leader out there. And so the change that happened there to where it is now, you all can imagine, as a woman leader, when you are entering an organization which is predominantly male oriented in terms of the leadership, and uh, I think it's been a long journey, and from there onwards, I think there has been a huge transformation of men, women, leadership roles, and yeah, I think there has been a huge cultural shift in which I have experienced myself, and it's been a beautiful journey since then.
Great. Pankaj, what about you? I suppose if something like that happens in your organization, it gets escalated to your desk. Have you faced a situation like that? And if yes, then how did you respond to it?
Yeah, I mean, it happens all the time, Hemant. I mean, it may not have that color of DNI because it's very difficult, to say that was because of DNI. But yeah, I mean, there are, I mean, when you're working in groups, when you have a lot of people with so much diversity, they're bound to be, those sort of aspects where people may have issues with the other person. Now, why that issue has been, I think, is the role of the leaders, and that's where their involvement becomes very, very important because, I mean, you can't just have a one cut fit sort of an approach here that, oh, I mean, this was the thing, so this has to be the solution. It has to be a multi-pronged sort of an intervention as an organization from different stakeholders, right from, as I said, the top person to the leadership team to the peers, and we have to devise ways by which we keep constantly hitting back to these people that this is right, this is wrong, and and that can only happen if you have a sort of a cadence to it, that how many times people are going through that sort of awareness trainings, how many times you're having gender sensitization, courses in your organization. What is the process that you have when you get when you go and meet people in colleges? What is it that you're projecting? What is your onboarding program looks like? What it talks about? So it has to be multiple interventions. There has to be a lot of these pieces come together. Then only you can have a very, very inclusive environment. I mean, diversity is one thing, that, as I said in the beginning, it's just an action item. I think the role really starts once that diverse group is there as one team in the organization, and that's where the challenges start happening, of how you start accepting each other as part of the same team. And that's where I think each one of us has to come and play our role as role models. And when people start seeing that, look, this is how others are reacting to a situation, slowly and gradually, I think then that is what the culture is. It's a manifestation of values, and it's a manifestation of the behaviors of your leaders of that organization. So all has to come together, and then only you can create something which probably you can say is an ideal DNI sort of environment in an organization.
Right. And that must therefore make the importance of communicators, especially internal communicators, even more accentuated, right? Because they are the ones not only creating and presenting role models to the internal stakeholders, but also communicating the value system of the organization top down. Smita, have you encountered a situation like that in your past? And what do you think about the role of communicators? And that's a question that's coming from Saurav Kanungo, who's a part of our class of 2021, which will begin soon. He's asked basically what the role of communicators could be. What do you think, Smita? Has that kind of a situation happened? And can communicators be the ideal mediators in a situation like that?
So, Saurav, I think amazing question, and thanks for asking that, and thanks for putting the role of a communicator in the forefront. I think as a communicator, we're in a wonderful position to really influence. That's our job, right? To influence and to build perceptions, and hence use it to your advantage. Yes, going back to the question before that of this kind of a situation being there, if it's a case-to-case basis, like the rest of the panelists said, that the leader has to pitch in and then do the needful. But if you see this as a repetitive thing in an organization, that means there needs to be a culture shift that needs to happen. And how do you do that? As a communicator, you've got a huge power in your hand. And I want to narrate this incident from an organization that I worked with, where they were going through this entire shift in, like Janet mentioned, that there were more number of men, and literally like out of 120 leaders, there were like 110 men and maybe 10 or even lesser now women, and the objective was to build that leadership pipeline, women leadership pipeline. And but the leader was extremely passionate here, and she made it a point that emerging leaders were brought to the forefront and narrate authentic stories, talk about their stories, tell their stories very, very authentically on how and where did they face that roadblock, and what were the perceptions that really made the way they were perceived, or what were the things that were a roadblock to their progress and their existence in that organization. And it wasn't like man bashing, but it was about you had to sit there and you had to listen. These are, and hence I said that it's very important for a leader to be aligned, like all of the panelists did say that, very important for a leader to be aligned. So as a communicator, you have the power to tell those authentic stories. Okay, go tell them. As a leader, you have the power to represent the underrepresented. If you feel that maybe women are underrepresented, you have the power to represent them. As an internal communicator, roll out campaigns that will allow you to talk about how and why or how you can make it more comfortable for your female counterpart to work alongside and really benefit the organization and even help you grow as a professional. So I think we are in a very, very good position to influence the organizational culture and to bring about this change. Okay. Actually, yeah. I'm sorry. I'm going to just take a minute more. One of the things that I did at Voltas was it was a very, very small campaign, but the results were extremely, surprising. The organization, we saw some sections of the organization where they did not like talking about their achievements. If there were individual achievements, they did not like talking about it. They were very shy and conservative about it. Or there were also situations where people did not like to talk about the amount of time they were spending with their family, which I don't know, maybe they felt that if they speak about the time that they're spending with their family, maybe they're not doing their work properly, so, and in that sense, like, do you realize if you have most number of men, and if that's what men think, maybe they're not even sharing the load at their home. So your responsibility as an organization does not lie towards your workforce, but also to the society at large, right? You need to change that perception. So we just rolled out a campaign which spoke about, tell us about, especially during this lockdown, that how well are you utilizing, how are you becoming a rounded person during your work from home days? So which means, and there was a caveat, that you don't just talk about your work. We want to know more about your hobbies and more about how you're spending time with family. And we were pretty surprised to have, we had over, I think 300 entries on people talking about how they're spending time, how they're helping out their family, how they're tutoring their children at home. And it just is, and today they're way more open. And we've seen that over the last 3 months, they're way more open to talk about stuff over and above their work, and not just their work, but about them being a more rounded person.
That's very interesting, and I hope that we get to see this campaign at Fulcrum Awards later this year. I want to bring the same question to Akshara and Janet. Role of communicators when it comes to mediating and communicating that value system internally in organization and making D&I interventions more effective. Akshara, you first.
I think, it's like, I think everyone sort of covered most elements, but just from the perspective of when you're designing campaigns or when you're a communicator, there's so much that so many brands who've had PR nightmares, when they've, done an ad where, I'll give you an example of a few that came in, where sometimes lighter is better, and didn't even actually realize that what the cascading impact is. So one is being very sensitive that what you may do as a communicator may impact a whole lot of people across cultures, countries, subconsciously. So that's one thing. So being very particular about the work that you put out there. Something really interesting that I've seen is some clients of ours have started putting in their RFQs. Are you actually implementing gender and I mean just inclusivity in general, which is really refreshing, right, to see. And we did a research where we actually saw that a whole lot of people of ethnic origin felt that they needed to be 4 out of 10 people actually felt that they needed to be more qualified than their Caucasian counterpart. So it needs internally having them be educated through training and development, saying you're good enough, something as basic as that. So, there's lots to share. I mean, this can go on.
Over to you, Janet. Have you ever played the role of the chief mediator when it comes to communicating the organization's D&I intentions?
So I must have not played the role of a mediator, but let me give you one example. Okay, a very interesting example, because as we were having, hearing so many viewpoints, many memories are coming to our mind. And so when I joined the Aditya Birla Group, and so D&I as a topic which has become important now, I think we were walking the talk then. And, how we imbibe this into our values. So HR was bringing, was doing campus recruitment. And they had to show the gender diversity, how Aditya Birla Group employees a mix between men and women. And he brought out a brochure where, men and women are together in that brochure. And, what are the different roles that each of these people play across the business. And it was a very important, and that brochure still is there with me because, it's a very, momentous phase for me. But we were walking the talk then, more than 20 years ago, and how, men and women are an integral part of the organization. And, I think it's been a long way since then, and we've lived up to our values.
Right. Great. So we are nearing the end of our panel discussion, and I want to bring us to the last couple of questions that I have on specifics of D&I, and starting with you, Akshara. What are some of the interventions that you have made in your firm or suggested to your clients for D&I? Akshara, did you get that?
Yeah, I did. I said that clients, I think the RFQ was zero tolerance policy, and I'll give you another case study. A lot of people have shared examples, when someone from our facility management team, housekeeping, was not spoken well to. It didn't only come from HR. There was immediately a cascading impact where director level stepped in and said, this is absolutely not the culture here. And that agility of being able to respond and set an example or a precedent, but in a nice way. It doesn't have to be derogatory in any way, but step in quickly, because the longer it drags on, people are watching and observing. So I would say there's a whole lot of things that clients are doing, from an RFQ to education to dealing with the situation at senior leadership, and very quickly. I think agility is extremely important because it can percolate very, very quickly across the organization if not stopped in its tracks.
Right. Interesting point of view. Janet, some of the interventions that you have made at your firm, at your long tenure at Aditya Birla Fashion and Retail, including if you want to shed some light on some interventions that did not work as well as they could have.
Okay. Actually, I don't remember many interventions that did not work. But some of the things, maybe what I could share is, I think D&I is built in our DNA of the organization. We don't treat it as a separate initiative, which we need to take it as a separate exercise and then do separate campaigns around it. So, say for example, if we do a newsletter, we have our workforce from the HO, from the factories, from the stores. So they're all all of them come together on one platform.
Right.
And these are the kind of initiatives that we do. Now, what happens is because you have a very limited, resources to do it, you don't have multiple platforms. So whatever platform you have, you leverage that to the fullest. But not many case studies come to our mind that
Right.
I feel happy that many things work for me.
Second, Janet, okay, which is when you brought this really important point there. A client met us in Chennai, and they have obviously the admin office staff, and then they have the staff that works on the manufacturing floor, right? And we just saw this exactly the same amenities. So if there is certain lighting in this area, it's there. If there is a different kiosks for food vending, it's the same. They said this reduces the disparity, creates inclusion, because we started seeing that the office staff, or so-called white collar, these are all demarcations that we bring in, and it adds to that bias. Is say, hey, the office team and the manufacturing team are going to have the same benefits. They're going to work in as similar as an office environment with the same privileges, even if it's a vending machine. You won't even believe the impact it makes. And I mean, this was just a thought that came to mind, because I was blown away by the fact that the client had done this initiative and done it so beautifully.
I think that's what becoming a role model is. I think those kind of interventions are bold enough to become role models for the industry. Pankaj, I want to come to you for a couple of questions on examples of D&I from a corporate India, some successful case studies that you may have come across, and some successful interventions you may have made at your end. Can you talk about? Can you give us a few examples, please?
Yeah, sure, Hemant. I mean, there are many actually, but I will try to keep it to the ones which are, which were very simple and had very impactful sort of an outcome. So one, of course, I want to talk about is, what you call as blind screening. Where at the very start, when you get the resume, you just remove the name of the person, you remove the college, you remove the religion, and you just give that sheet of paper which just has the skills, and the experience to your business leaders. I think that's one intervention I did in my previous organization. Really made, it really helped the function to look at people, with a lens that who's actually the right fit from a capability standpoint and nothing else. Other intervention I would like to talk about is the fact, and these are small little things, but what I'm seeing is the impact that these interventions are having. It's amazing. For example, you can have regular potlucks in your organization. You can get everyone invited. You can get them there. They can, there could be times when they can bring food and they can serve to everyone. And that I think is a great example of getting people from different communities to come together as one team and serving, that single purpose of feeding others, in organizations. Other could be to create some hobby clubs, because if you have a book club, you have a trekking club, you have a Zumba club, you have a fitness club, what it does is it gets people, regardless of their backgrounds, they're like-minded people, they come together and they feel part of the same community, which is into that. The third one I would say is about this flexi working. I think, and again, the policies today need to be customized. Can't be like a one cut for everyone. I remember the days when people had priorities at home that they wanted to fulfill. For example, they had ailing parents or they had kids exam where they wanted to be at home for like 3-4 months at a stretch. And whenever they want to have that sort of a request coming to their manager, the only answer they used to get was that, sorry, we can't give you. I mean, let's take that break now. And once you're done with those pieces, you can come back and reapply. I mean, those were the situations that people have faced. But today, I can talk about this arrangement that we have currently, where we appreciate and understand and recognize that when most of us are today, coming out of nuclear families where everyone is working, and when you have these sort of situations, you need to provide that sort of assistance to your employees. So we have a policy where we tell people that you can have a flexi sort of a work arrangement. You can look at, depending upon whether it's your kids exams and therefore you want to be at home for those 3 months, you can pick a arrangement where you just come to office 2 days in a week and rest days you work from home. Or it could be an arrangement where you say you work for 5 days, like a half a day, and everyone is aware that you are only there till 12 o'clock. And after that, it's your off time. Or you say that I've just worked 3 days in a week, the rest 2 days I'll be off. So there are different permutation combinations. So basically the premise here being, you need not to get worried about the job. You still have the job, and you're still able to have that sort of a fine balance between work and the priorities that you have on the personal front. So that is, I think, those are small little things. The other piece, as I said earlier, also, I think we need to keep reinforcing, these pieces. And I think one way of doing that is by having those awareness sessions, to have those gender sensitization training modules available to people all the time. You can have digital modules, you can have face-to-face conversations where you have people coming to your office and talking about those case studies. So, and most important piece, I think, is also to give people the opportunity to talk about some of these issues in case they are facing these issues in full confidence. You need to look at having a sort of a listen helpline, or a mechanism like an employee assistance program where you have those trained counselors, psychologists who are available, and people can just call these guys and get that assistance that they're looking at, from, it could be anything. It could be their personal issues, it could be a legal issue, it could be a financial issue. But regardless of who that person is, people have that opportunity of calling these guys who are experts in those respective areas and can give that sort of a help. So some of these pieces, if you start looking at implementing, I think what it does is it shifts this whole piece from why to how.
Right.
I think that is the shift that we are all looking at through these interventions.
Right. So there seems to be that there are a lot of possibilities, a lot of possible right answers. It just takes the will to act on some of them. Smita, in your experience at your current and previous roles, what are some of these interventions that have worked well?
So picking up from where, taking from where Pankaj left, he did speak about some counselors. And at Voltas, we do have a team of counselors. And, there's this helpline where employees, and we've seen over the years that the number has actually gone up. And I wouldn't just attribute it to that, okay, maybe they are having more number of people, having more issues maybe, but no, I think it's because people are getting, it's the constant communication that has been happening, telling people that, it's okay to speak to someone. It is okay to have an external person help you and look at it from an external, from another lens. And people are getting more and more comfortable with it. And there is no taboo associated to this. So yes, we have and the numbers are growing, and we have a very, very strong team of counselors that look into it. I think that really helps. Second is something that's in the pipeline, and that's been done in my previous organizations that I've been part of, is that to have there are many times when we tend to get into our own shell. we are only learning from each other, or maybe just learning from what we have done in the past. It's important to, at every point in time, I mean, continuous learning should be embedded in every culture of every organization. So it's important to look beyond. You might be part of an engineering setup, but it's important to maybe have conversations with people who are not even from your industry, maybe from the music industry, maybe from the entertainment industry. You never know what you'll pick up. And we've actually seen that changing the culture, really moving the needle in my last organization. And it's something that I'm also putting into practice in Voltas, where we have people from different spheres of life coming and speaking to employees once a month. Of course, because we've got 28,000 employees really, and across the globe, we have to then broadcast it through a digital medium. But I mean, it's important to have conversations and authentic conversations with different people from different spheres of life and different background. Third is that as a communicator, I think you have a huge role to play, and you are in that position to do so. So I've been very lucky to be working with marketing teams that actually, have partnered with me to break stereotypes, to look at campaigns that really talk about stuff that people are not ready to speak about. I mean, of course, it builds your brand equity. Like we said, that, people do prefer brands who take a stand, but it also makes you feel you feel more satisfied as a professional. And because we're speaking to a lot of communicators out there today, I think, really leverage on this, capitalize on this position of yours. There are, like I would mention a couple of campaigns that we did with Voltas Peco in the last, in the last 6 months. One would be the Mother's Day campaign, where we looked at a single mother, the concerns of a single mother. There used to be a time when people don't want to speak about, single parents. We spoke about single mothers. We spoke about the concerns, and we spoke about acceptance. Then we also spoke about, like, how you have with Ariel Share the Load. We had, we spoke about the same kind of concerns. We had, it was more about a research that parents need. Sundays are meant for everyone. It was called the Sunday paradox. So Sundays are meant for everyone. It's just not meant for the family, and not maybe, and most often in the most progressive of places. And we've had, like, I was party to real conversations among women groups and communities. In the beginning, when when we discussed the idea, I was like, maybe no, in the urban areas, urban locations, come on, women and men are equal. No, we are not. In terms of distribution of responsibilities, no, we are not, because inherently we are not brought up like that. Maybe, the upbringing is not the same. So there were real conversations amongst people, and that's when I realized that I was wrong in thinking that, no, it's the same situation across. It's not the same situation across. And that was the stereotype that we were breaking, that everyone, and not just the husband, not just the partner, but also your child, they too have a role to play, and they too have responsibilities in your life. So yes, on the external front, I think as a communicator, you have that you have that power to influence your marketing team, or work together with your marketing team to break stereotypes and to bring in more diversity and inclusion, not just in your organization, but in the society at large.
Right. I think that's one of the key takeaways that has emerged from this conversation, is that the power of communicators internally and externally, the power that they have to create change, as well as to make difficult interventions possible and to make them effective. And that brings us to the close of this panel discussion. I'm so glad that we were able to host it to try and understand the importance of diversity and inclusion, the challenges that one might face while building it within their organizations, and especially the role of communicators in making it possible. Thanks to all our panelists for taking time out for this conversation, and thanks to all our attendees as well who joined us on Zoom and on YouTube. Apologies if we couldn't take your questions. This webinar will be available on our YouTube channel if you would like to revisit it or share it with anyone who missed it. There are more opportunities to learn from leaders of communications in these dynamic times that we host every week. Check out reputationtoday.in or @reptodaymag on Twitter to know which those are. Do connect with us on our social platforms at @SCoREIND to stay updated on a variety of learning initiatives that we organize. For now, if you know a young graduate looking for a career in PR, direct them to SCoRE. Once again, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks to our panelists, and I hope to see you all very soon. Bye-bye.
See you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you,
Bye.
Pankaj, Akshara, Smita, and Jay.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.